Hello, I'm Laura from Little Dale Dogs, and today we're going to be teaching the push part of Treibball. By now you should have mastered the out, because it's really important when you start doing the push, the dog is always in that out position, ready to push it towards you. Because the whole idea of the game is that ball's moving towards you. You don't want the dog to start taking the ball off and doing other things with it. It's got to come back to you. So to start the push, we have the dog opposite us, in that position, nice and straight, ready to push it towards us. When we're doing the push, we want the dog to be pushing down as low as possible, because that will give them the most control over the ball. And that's really important later on when you've got bigger distances, because they're going to be able to need to steer that ball towards you. We also need a really nice closed mouth push, because if they've got their mouth open, you've always got that potential of those teeth puncturing the ball. So the way we teach this is we have a little treat and we put it on the floor under the ball, and we literally encourage the dogs just to put their nose under the ball. Now for some dogs, if they're a little bit nervous, what you may be doing is putting that treat slightly in front of the ball. So they're not actually making contact with it, but it's just building up their confidence to be able to dip their head under the ball, ready for later on when we're going to be pushing it, so they've got to get that ball moving. Good girl. So you can see there, she's getting her nose quite nicely underneath it. Is a good girl. To start with, it's probably easier to do it on a flat surface. The wood chip probably isn't ideal for this, because something flatter like a hard floor, those tiny movements would get that ball moving, where it's a bit harder on here for her actually to get it moving as nicely as it should. Did you find it? Girl. So it's also getting them familiar with the fact that the ball will move around and roll around, and it's quite nice because she's not frightened by it at all, which is really good. Whereas some dogs, as soon as that ball moves, they may be a little bit worried. So the other thing you could do is stand the ball on something, so they're just getting used to working around that ball without it being a problem for them. And when you are teaching that push, it's really important, it's always coming towards you. So when you're putting that treat under the ball, if they try and come round and get it from the other side, you want to make sure they don't get the treat, because we don't want to reinforce that. That ball's got to be pushed towards us to get the treat underneath. You can teach it with a hand target, or some dogs will know a touch, which is another way of teaching it. I've found this to be the most effective way, but of course it all depends on the skill of the dog and the handler and what the dog's used to. The next step is to start adding your word in. And what you would do is you'd put your treat under the ball as we've been doing before, but as they're just about to put their head down towards the ball, so you'll know they're committed to perform the behaviour, you'd add your word. I tend to use the word push, but again, it depends on whatever, and as with all commands in training, it doesn't actually matter what word you use, as long as you always use the same word for doing the same thing. So, push. Good girl. It's a good girl. Did you get it? Good girl. Ready? Ready. And push. So we're beginning to get her to link the behaviour of pushing her nose under the ball with the word that we're using. Once they've got the hang of that, so when you say your word, you want them putting their nose down, pushing that ball, and they're always being rewarded with that treat under the ball still. Once you get to that stage and it's really reliable, you can then move on to taking that treat so you haven't got a treat under the ball. For some dogs, you might need to pretend to put a treat under just for the first few goes, but we're still going to be rewarding them. The reward's going to be coming from our hand now rather than under the ball. So dogs tend to pick up quite quickly that they're not missing out, it's just the treat is now coming from somewhere else. So, ready, push. Good girl. Ready, push. Push. Good girl. So I'm rewarding her for putting her head under the ball, but the reward is now coming from my hand rather than from underneath the ball. And the other thing I'm doing, which is really important, is I'm rewarding her over the top of the ball, because all the treat is coming while she's in that out position. What I don't want to do is to ask her to push and then call her round the ball to reward her, because she shouldn't be getting rewards around here. The treat's always coming, well, that ball between, the ball should always be between us when we're working. Push. See, I don't want her round there, so what I'm going to do is bring her back round into that out. Teddy, push. She's not quite sure what I mean, so what I'm going to do, Teddy, good girl. Push and show her what I want, so give her a hand. Good girl. So I've got something to reward her. Good girl. So there, where she was trying to do other things with the ball, which is just things that she's been taught before, I'm not going to get cross with her because she's been taught them. All I'm going to do is show her what I want her to do. So she understands the word that push means put your nose under the ball. So it's just another command that she's now going to have in her vocabulary. At that stage, the ball is close and you're saying push, and they're putting their nose underneath that ball and making it move. So it may only move a small distance, but it's beginning to make it move. What you can then do is start adding in some distance. And also we're going to change the criteria. So reward the dog for that ball touching our feet. So to start with, it will still only be one push, but it might be a slightly harder push. And it's also channeling the direction of that ball, because it's got to come towards us. And then as they get better, you very slowly increase that distance, but the criteria is that that ball touches our feet and then the dog gets rewarded from your hand. As with all dog training, it's always best to do lots of little tiny short sessions, so it keeps your interest as well as the dog's. Doing too much of one thing can get a frustration build up on your part and on the dog's part. Once you've got the dog pushing it and you're beginning to add a bit more distance in, you then may need to bring in a few extra props. Sometimes to get a really nice straight push, what I will do is use something, either practicing like a narrow corridor, so again the ball's not going to go very far, or even have like a line of bricks on the floor, or perhaps chairs on their side. Again, you can be quite adaptable what it is. It's just something to give the dog an idea and help that ball roll in a straight line, which will help the dog get the idea of what they're doing. Now you've got your out and your push, they're the basics that you need. You can start working them together. So it's just building up that distance to get slightly further away. However, when you're increasing that distance, never be afraid to split them back into two exercises. So you may do lots of practice on the out or lots of practice on the push, and then bring them back as and when. Other things you can then add in later on is having multiple balls. For some dogs that can be a big step because they've got to work out which one you want them to go to. So to start with, what I would do is have another ball just to one side, still work with one ball, but you've got another ball there as an option. Your next stage would be to get the dog steering the ball, because sometimes the ball will go into places where they've got to steer it out and round and back to you standing in the goal. Or it may be that you've got obstacles and things in the way, so you need to get an element of being able to get that ball to steer towards you. There's several different ways of teaching this. One way of doing it is when they're pushing the ball towards you, take a little step to one side and see if you can get the dog to start altering the route of that ball. They're still aiming for your feet, but all of a sudden your feet are in a slightly different place. The dog would have to go round the ball to push that ball towards you. Other ways, you can bring in some sheepdog terms, so the out is in a slightly different place. That's another way of doing it, but it really does depend on the skill of the dog and the handler. There's lots of different ways of all coming to the same conclusion, but it depends on the way that the dog works. Treibball is all about having fun with your dog and working at the pace that your dog and you can cope with. You can just have a go and practice at home and have a bit of fun with your dog.